Let's go to Clinton Township, Michigan, where David is on our Republicans line. Hi, David.
Good morning. Good morning, Tucker.
Good morning.
Good morning, young lady. I don't know your name. This is the first time I've ever seen you.
Libby Casey.
Okay, thank you. I want to speak to you as a journalist, okay? Before you came on, there was a gentleman that come on, and he stated that Republican conservatives hate Barack Obama. Why do you think that is? I don't hate the guy. I just dislike his policies.
Well, I of course, I agree with you completely. I don't hate Obama at all. In fact, I find him charming now. I found him charming on the campaign when I was talking to him. I agree completely. I don't hate him, and I never have, and I hope I never do. I'm not into hating people as a general matter. I think he has been a very ideological president, a very left-wing president, and so it's understandable that people who don't agree with him would be frustrated by the things he is doing. I think whether you agree with the president or not, you can stand back far enough to recognize the awesome ambition, the scope of his ambition is amazing. I mean, overhauling healthcare and energy and education. And, I mean, there's really no part of American life that this administration hasn't sought to exert greater control over. And again, that's either great or it's terrifying, depending on your point of view. But he's hardly an inert president. I mean, he's a very active, polarizing president. That, of course, one of the many ironies. Like all the last three presidents, he's promised to be a uniter, not a divider, and wound up being exactly the opposite. But as for the personal stuff, no, I don't get that. He seems, I mean, to be totally blunt with you, having been in Washington for 20 years, he's a lot less personally annoying than Bill Clinton was, I find. A lot more ingenuous or less disingenuous than Clinton was. So, yeah, I don't hate him.
John, Democrats line in Glenview, Illinois. You're on with Tucker Carlson.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Carlson. I missed your TV show.
Thanks.
I have a comment that I think is relevant with the Kagan hearings coming up soon. You're going to hear a lot, and I'd like your comment on this. You're going to hear more and more stuff about activist judges and constructionists and that kind of thing. And for people who aren't familiar with that, it's the insistence that the Constitution means what it says literally, and also both that and the intent of the founders is paramount. And I'd just like to point out that hypocrisy is not the problem with hypocrisy is not the sin of hypocrisy itself, but that when it happens, it shows you that the people engaged in it really care more about the football game, about winning, than they do about the what it is that they're talking about. The example I'd like you to comment on is when Sarah Palin, who the Tea Party for the most part loves, talked about she's looking forward to getting in to become the president of the Senate and mix it up with them, really get in there and expand that role. You could argue, you really can argue that that's legitimate, but that, of course, is an extremely liberal interpretation of the Constitution. We know, I'm almost done, we know that the people who wrote the Constitution, Madison and them, we know exactly what they thought the role of vice president was, because we know, and what they meant when they wrote it, because we know exactly what they did. We have John Adams' letters to his wife and to Washington talking about how they wouldn't even let him talk unless it was to break a tie. Right. So you see where I'm going with this, but the Tea Party people love her, even though she's the opposite of a constructionist in that term. She wants to do something that is extremely different from what the intent of the founders saw that role as being.
That's a really interesting point that I have not considered nor heard before. I guess I would partly rebut it with the obvious observation that American government has changed quite a bit since the original documents were drafted, and we have now direct election of senators, for instance. But that's an interesting point, and I'm not exactly sure what claims made by then Governor Palin you're referring to, but I will say, as a general matter, there are very few people on either side who have internalized the idea of restraint in government. Of course, I don't think the left has even entertained the idea of restraining their appetites once in power. But the right does pay a lot of lip service to the idea that you ought to pull back, let people make their own decisions, kind of the libertarian talking points. And it goes without saying that very few people, once they actually get into positions of power, let other people make their own decisions. I mean, let me just say, you often hear people say, "Oh, I'm a libertarian." I agree with the idea that people ought to sort of do what they want to do. But what they really mean is, I ought to be able to do what I want to do. What they really don't mean is, other people ought to be allowed to do whatever they want to do. No, give people power, and 9 times out of 10, they will try to prevent other people from making what they consider to be mistakes. They will not stand back and allow other people to do things they think are wrong. They can't control themselves. They're just there's a nanny in each of us, and we have to fight hard to tame it. Some people don't even try to fight against it, unfortunately.
Carolyn on Twitter is pushing back a little bit against something you said. She says Obama is not very left-wing. What do you make of criticisms from liberals who say the president has not lived up to what they thought he would be? They thought he would work for things like the public option in health care, pushing climate change legislation earlier and harder.
It's remarkable to me. Well, first, I can't believe they're coming at me on Twitter. There's Twitter. Unbelievable. I'm being tweeted at.
Tweeted with, not at.
Tweeted with,
Yeah.
okay. Look, there are some, well, let me just say off the top, I always have a lot of sympathy for people who mean it, for the ideologues. I like ideologues. I mean, they're sincere. They hew to ideas rather than people. That their allegiance is to ideas rather than people. And amen, and good for them. I mean, I liked a lot of the Ralph Nader people. It goes without saying that I liked a lot of the Ron Paul people. So I'm very sympathetic to that point. But the truth is, Obama has absolutely done the bidding of the left, by and large. There are exceptions, sure. I mean, no one's perfect. How do you know that I'm right in saying that? Well, it's very simple. He will not be challenged from the left. If he was truly deviating from left-wing orthodoxy and truly alienating his liberal supporters, then there would be a Ralph Nader coming at him in the primaries in 2012. And there won't be, because fundamentally he satisfied the demands of the left.
Let's go to Aurora, Colorado, where Ann is on our independent line. Welcome.
Hi. I wanted to just mention something about what happens after a Tea Party win. Our local city council was up for part of the seats need to be filled last November, and this was, of course, after August, the rise of the Tea Party. And November saw a very vocal Tea Party movement in our city of Aurora with voices and visually. And what resulted was a large turnout of Republicans and a small turnout of Democrats. And actually, overall, it was a small turnout, but the Tea Party was considered to have won their positions and their people, and they put in a very conservative Republican city council, which in the first 3 months, the big thing that they did was blight a large tract of agricultural land between Denver International Airport and Interstate 70 in order to grant tax subsidies to an Australian developer who wants to put in a multi-use community. And the tune of the tax subsidy was $90 million, and the Tea Party managed to defeat a very tiny incremental tax increase to keep the Aurora Public Libraries open, and hence 4 of the libraries of the 7 libraries were closed in the first 4 months. And just a few months ago, or just last month, they couldn't come up with $2 to $3 million to cover a budget shortfall. So their response to that was to lower firemen and policemen wages. So, there'll be taxes. They'll just be diverted more to the special interests again for corporate subsidies, and the public will generally lose out.
Well, I think you make a really good point about the Australian developers. There are a lot of them. They come to this country really without the knowledge or consent of most Americans, with their kangaroo burgers and their weird hats, coming in and developing space for shopping malls. I think it's a huge problem. We spend a lot of time focused on the border with New Mexico or Arizona, Texas, thinking of people coming from Latin America into this country, but too little time attempting to stem the tide of Australian developers, and I think we ought to. It's been an ongoing concern for me, and I'm glad it was addressed.
Talking about immigration on, perhaps this is a serious note for you about the Australians, but if we look at the bigger picture here, what are you seeing as the message that's coming from Washington right now in reference to what's happening in Arizona, the new law in Arizona,